It's that time for At Issues return. Andrew and Chantel are ready to go, and so is Bruce Anderson as he joins Canada's most watched political panel. Well, not much has changed in 4 years, right? Same At Issue graphics, same set, and of course, same insightful analysis. But one thing is about to change. Everyone is here tonight, Andrew, Chantel, and Bruce. But this is the last night I'll be able to say that, because for Bruce, this is the last night. Do you want to explain this?
I think the most important thing for me to do is to thank you and Andrew and Chantel for making this such a fun experience for the last 4 years. It was probably fun for about 3.5 years. The first 6 months, I was just trying not to embarrass myself, and hopefully I accomplished that, or if I embarrassed myself, people forgot about it.
People have long forgotten.
About it. But it's the right time to do this. My daughter, who's been involved in politics, as I've said on air before, was asked to take on an important job in the government, in the Prime Minister's office. And, I thought that, I tried my best to manage the potential for perceived conflict when she was working for the third-party leader. I think the potential for perceived conflict is higher now, and so it's the right time for me to give up this seat and let the panel go on and continue to do the great work. But it's been a lot of fun.
Well, it has been a lot of fun, and Bruce announced this a couple of nights ago, and Twitter and various other social media have been alive discussing that, and some of the remarks are the ones that we echo about how great you've been on this program and a person full of integrity. However, you still have one more At Issue to do, and so I think we use...
I'm here.
Yeah, control yourself, and don't hold back, all right? I think it gives us the opportunity actually to reflect on the 4 years, not about on your performance, but a lot of things had changed in the 4 years. I mean, for one, we now have 3 new leaders of all the 3 main parties. They're all new in a space of 4 years. But, in a bigger way, in a more general way, in terms of a shift in the way politics is done in this country now, over the last 4 years, have we seen a shift, Andrew?
Well, we've seen a lot of long-standing trends grow worse, I think is what I would say. We've always had attack ads, or at least for many years, but they got worse. We've had micro-targeting of target demographics. We've had that. It's gotten more sophisticated, if that's the right word. We've had the disrespect of Parliament before and the disrespect of MPs' role in it. That got worse. So a lot of trends that I think some people were writing books about before had already become quite serious, got worse. But at the very end of this 4 years, we had this very interesting election where the party that won at least promised on some of those fronts to reverse it. Maybe people have promised that in the past, but also in the course of the campaign ran a very different campaign. I think for the reason that they thought they could win with it, but nevertheless, at least they demonstrated that you could win in that way, and that's a more hopeful sign.
And the potential that there has been a shift then?
A shift back, I wouldn't overstate that. A shift maybe back to the status quo of 5 years ago, perhaps.
All right, Chantal?
I would agree with all that over the past 4 years, and I think what we witnessed over those 4 years was a huge missed opportunity on the part of the Conservative Party. The first Conservative government in some decades with one would have hoped an agenda and the ways to achieve it, and instead we saw all of the things that Andrew talked about. And apparently the belief on the part of the Conservative movement, which I believe is about more than that this was the way to do it and the way to win. And on that score, it's been a hard 4 years. I would think the hardest 4 years of my time covering politics. I've covered harder issues, the Constitution, as you have, free trade. But this has been kind of a demeaning time to cover politics. And up to a point, voters, in the end, the 66% that always did not want the Conservatives, made it their priority to change that. And I think that's a huge failure on the part of the Conservative movement.
Bruce, you study trends and shifts in a lot of different ways, but in politics, what have you seen?
Well, I agree. I think it's been a very hard 4 years to try to be open to describing the policy initiatives of the government in a positive way, because their style got in the way of them so much. In a way, I sort of think that the people who should feel most upset about that are real Conservatives. The style of the Harper government became a betrayal of their agenda, if you like, the worst possible way to sell it, the way to sell it that would guarantee that they would ultimately lose power more quickly than perhaps they had to. Now, I'm not saying that everything about their policy agenda was going to build very large amounts of public support, but they brought a more severe defeat upon themselves based on the way that they conducted themselves. So if I step back and say what's changed, I think it's too early to know whether a change is permanent. But the feeling that I get when I talk to people about the result of this election reminds me more of something I would have heard 25 years ago, that we've seen this long deterioration into this kind of sense that we could only ever run negative political campaigns and win, that only negative advertising was the kind of the nuclear weapon of politics, and that somebody who is promising to do that a little bit differently was going to be ultimately roadkill for their naivety. I think we at least have reason to wonder if that's changed now, and so far the early kind of response of Canadians, including those who didn't vote for this party and this Prime Minister, are to say we want to see more of that rather than we think we got something naive.
But it is early, and it's very early.
It's going to be very interesting to see, as I think I've said before, in the next election, when the Liberals are defending their record rather than the fresh newcomers, do they continue on the positive track, or do they resort to the tactics that incumbent governments have often resorted to of fear of the unknown?
There's one other thing that occurs to me, that we always, over the last several decades anyway, have been kind of trained to think that you could never have an election that wasn't really about the economy. I don't think this election was about the economy. We had decades where regionalism and federalist separatist tendencies looked like they would never go away, but they weren't really a part of the political discussion in any meaningful way in terms of affecting the outcome here. We challenged the question of whether we were still as tolerant a country as we had been in the past, or whether we were kind of more pretending to be tolerant. And I think large numbers of voters responded to that challenge and said, no, we want to be tolerant.
Chantal?
4 years ago, we were still in the Quebec is sitting out federal politics, voting for the Bloc Québécois. I think this is as close. It doesn't look like Trudeau-mania to me, the result of this election. It looks to me like the election of Brian Mulroney in 1984. The kind of spirit that came from it, a government that is activist, that wants to do things, and that is different, and Quebec taking a chance on it. But when I started at Le Devoir as the bureau chief, it was a few years after Brian Mulroney had come about, and I had never worked for print, so I went in the files. In those days, it was all paper to look at what Michel Vastel and Lise Bissonnette had written. And I was stunned by all the hope that had been vested in Brian Mulroney, because by the time I sat there, it was 1990, and Meach was on the brink, and things had soured. So when I look at what is happening now, and I hear it on the streets in Quebec, people are happy, and they voted the same way as others in Canada voted for something they hadn't done in a long time. So I'm curious to see where in 4 years we will be comparing to the headlines and the spirit of this week.
Well, you know, if things are going to be anyway the same, there is going to have to be some kind of game changer mechanism used in politics in general. We've talked about a number of different things, but is there any sense of a real game changer that could happen in the way politics is done?
Yeah, I mean, the Liberals have a lot of different democratic reform proposals, but the big one, and I never say game changer, but I'll say it for this one, is electoral reform, because you are literally changing the game. You change the way the votes are counted, you're changing the whole system of rewards and penalties in politics, and you will change out of that the party strategies, the voters' strategies, and choosing amongst them. You'll get new parties starting up, depending on the system that you choose. It's huge. We didn't really talk about it very much during the election campaign. People knew it was out there somewhere, but I guess maybe the thought was, well, we'll have lots of opportunity to discuss it now. It's going to be very important, obviously, not only what model they choose, but also how they go about implementing it. There's going to have to be some degree of all-party consensus, or failing that, or a referendum. But they cannot just ram through the Liberals' preferred model. That would bring an end to any kind of honeymoon or good feeling in a hurry.
Bruce, on that?
Well, I think the Liberals are making a very big wager on two ideas. One is that compromise is a way to make progress in this country on major and difficult policy issues. And the other is collaboration with other stakeholders that have influence, even if they're not in a decision-making mode.
Both of those play into the First Minister's conference.
They absolutely do, and that's where it's going.
Risk.
I think that there's a great deal of risk. Potentially there's significant reward, But whether you look at it from the standpoint of the sheer political calculus, it's probably the right thing to try to do if we're going to get anywhere further than we've been on the carbon pricing and climate change issue. And the other one that I'm thinking about a lot is the First Nations questions. If we don't resolve those two issues, or at least start moving in a direction that the consensus feels is better, there'll be some compromises involved along the way. I think those really don't just threaten the social piece that we have in Canada, but the economic prospects that we have. They're no longer social or environmental and nice to have. They're essential to have issues when it comes to economic planning.
Chantal?
You can't have a federation without the partners of the federations engaging in a dialogue, not just in a, I have a knife that I'm bringing to the table and I'm going to put it to your throat. And it's not just First Nations or climate change. Just look at the refugee issue. This will not succeed unless municipal governments, provincial governments, and the federal government work together, because there can't be a resolution. This is a very practical issue. The federal government is not in the business of getting kids to school and making sure that people settle in various provinces. So we have to do this, and the federation is stronger, even if people don't agree, when people are aware of where people come from. That can't happen unless you have dialogue, unless Alberta comes to the table and says, this is who we are and where we are on this issue. We used to do this. Sometimes it's divisive, and nobody wants the replay of, health accord conferences where you eat pizza late at night while you haggle over money. But you do need to have that discussion.
I've only got a minute or so left, and I introduced this late in the discussion, but 4 years ago we talked a lot about the impact that social media could end up having on politics in the country. Was there a real impact? Did it create any real change?
It has, not always for the good. I think 4 years ago I would have said it's useful in kind of disrupting orthodoxies, and it was, I think, for a time. I think more and more it's become the enforcer of orthodoxies, which is unfortunate. It was and is full of potential for unleashing people's ability to discuss things, but too many people just want to go in there and just attack and harangue people, and there's some lost potential there.
Bruce?
There's a lot of bad and there's a lot of good I see in social media. On those days when it's easy to spot the bad and to feel like, why were these technologies visited upon us? I can feel a little despair about it. But then there are other days when I go, younger people have been sharing and trading information about political issues and policy questions and their political choices to a much greater degree. And we had a better turnout in this election than we have had before. This is the medium that is going to matter to a lot of people, in addition to TV and newspapers. Don't get me wrong.
Thank you.
But it's going to play a larger and larger role, and so we best get comfortable with it and celebrate its positive aspects too.
Yeah,
No phenomenon is brought together on the coverage of politics, the so-called two solitudes, closer, with more exchanges about who's saying what about what than the social media. And on that basis alone, that's progress.
All right. That's an interesting way of looking at it that I don't think we thought of before, and that's great. It's that time, Bruce. It really has been great having you with us. We're all, both those of us at the table and those watching, are richer for your contributions.
Well, viewers have been very kind too, and I want to thank all of those people who found occasion to say that they appreciated my work on the panel over the years.
Great. All right. Thank you.